Hey there everyone, Step here for gathering information. It is day 3, the final part of our primer for War of the Spark. In part 1 we talked about the creatures of War of the Spark. In part 2 we talked about the removal spells from War of the Spark, and today we're going to talk about arguably the most important part for actual gameplay, the instant speed effects. These are the things that your opponent might be holding in their hand if you're not sure what they have and you don't want to walk into a trap. Then knowing what they could possibly cast on your turn could save your life. Now, instants come in a variety of forms, notably combat tricks and removal among them, but also things that might allow your opponent to get value off mana they're holding up in case they want to make you think they have a removal spell. And finally, counter spells and other asset removal, such as enchantment removal or artifact destruction. Now, before we go any further, there is one ability that allows a permanent to be cast at instant speed, and that's Flash. Now, I've been through this entire set, and usually you'd see at least one Flash creature in blue, but there are 0 creatures with Flash. There are 0 permanents with Flash. The word Flash does not appear in this set except in one place, and that's Emergent Zone. Emergent Zone is a land that taps for colorless, but you can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice it to cast spells as though they had Flash, or at instant speed. So if your opponent has an Emergent Zone, watch out for that. Adding 2 mana to the cost of a spell might be worth their while, but you're going to be able to see it coming. The other thing that could possibly give something Flash is if somebody opens a Teferi, Time Raveler, at rare. This allows your opponents to cast sorcery spells as though they had Flash, so watch out for that. But those 2 things are going to be on the battlefield, and you're going to see them coming, so you don't have to worry about them maybe having a Flash creature. Now, don't think that means you're safe, though, because there is an ability that appears in the Bolas colors, or Grixis, that does allow you to put a body on the field at instant speed, and that's Amass. Some blue spells, I think there's nothing in black, some red spells may have Amass. We'll get to them as we go through, but Amass, in case you aren't aware, puts a +1/+1 counter on target zombie army you control, or if you don't control a zombie army, you make one first. So if something reads Amass 2, you get a 2/2 at instant speed. So that's something to be aware of, but we're going to cover that as we go through. We're going to start with white, and we're going to start with the combat tricks. Defiance Strike is a single white mana for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Draw a card. So this is the least of the combat tricks. It won't save a creature that is going to die in combat, but it might allow a creature to trade. So it would normally be bad because they're using 2 cards on one of yours, a 2-for-1, but they do get to draw a card, so it might be worthwhile, and you might see this. More likely, if they have 1 and a white, they might have a battlefield promotion. 1 and a white for an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains first strike until end of turn, and you gain 2 life. So if they have 1 and a white open, this is something definitely to be concerned about. This would allow their smaller creature to kill your larger creature. They would still keep their creature. It would still be a 1-for-1 because they had to use this card, but sometimes that's okay. If they have a 3/2 and you have a 5/4, suddenly their 3/2 lives, your 5/4 dies, and that's probably not going to be good for you. So be aware of battlefield promotion. It's going to be probably the premium white combat trick. Also in white combat-ish tricks, we've got some removal. Divine Arrow deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. So if, for instance, you set up a double block thinking that you're going to trade or at least keep one of your creatures, and they deal 4 to the bigger one and then eat your smaller one, that's going to be bad for you. So 1 and a white is a very important mana cost to see and maybe play around. Also for 1 and a white, Gideon's Triumph is an instant. This one's at uncommon. Target opponent sacrifices a creature that attacked or blocked this turn. If you control a Gideon's Planeswalker, that player sacks 2 of those creatures instead. That text really doesn't matter that much. If they have a Gideon, then they probably have one of these, because I would hope to pick it up if I had a Gideon in my pile. But again, if you set up a double block and that's the only things that you have to sack, then they could eat one of your creatures. Or if you're attacking with 1 creature, they can just force you to sack it. So that's something to be aware of. This could be a pretty good combat trick. Next, we're going to talk about the things that could just straight kill you if you don't play around them, although I'm not going to say that these are all good, or even playable. Some of them can be good situationally, you just have to set that up. But let's start with Topple the Statue. 2 and a white, instant, at common. Tap target permanent. If it's an artifact, destroy it. Draw a card. So if there's an artifact that you want to destroy with this, that's fine. That can be good value. But more, this is just a tap target permanent. Tap their biggest thing so you can swing in past them. Tap their only blocker so that you can crush them on your next turn. Tap their biggest attacker so that they can't swing at you. This isn't really going to end games, but it might end the occasional game, and there are a couple of artifacts that you might want to destroy in this set, so having versatility and getting a card back means I think you might see this card in your opponent's deck. Next up, what happens if your opponent alpha strikes and leaves themselves open and you think that you're going to attack with all and crush them? Well, Rally of Wings, 1 and a white for an instant, untap all creatures you control. So you can untap your entire board after swinging with it and hopefully make some pretty good trades. Creatures you control with flying get +2/+2 until end of turn. I intend at some point to build the Build Around Flyers deck and win with like 2 of these in my board, but that's not really what it's for. It's for untapping your entire board and hopefully making some pretty good double or triple blocks. Next up, Gideon's Sacrifice. Single white for an instant. Choose a creature or planeswalker you control. All damage that would be dealt this turn to you and permanents you control is dealt to the chosen permanent instead. Oh, Gideon, my heart. This is basically a one-sided fog, and don't think that I'm playing down the versatility there, because fog isn't generally playable, but one-sided fog usually is, and for a single white, if you could pile all of your little things onto their big creature and keep your entire board except for 1 creature, you could make some pretty good trades with this. You could also set it up so that you alpha strike, and even if you don't have Rally of Wings, when they swing back, you fog them. So single white for a fog in that case, that's when fog is good. And the problem with fog is that you don't want to put it in your deck hoping that'll happen. But if you have other use for the card that you can use as a fog, then that might be worthwhile. Finally, in white, there's 1 rare instant. Ignite the Beacon, 4 and a white, if you want to leave 5 mana open for your opponent's turn. Search your library for up to 2 planeswalker cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. So, this isn't a card I expect to see a lot of play, although there are enough planeswalkers that it might be worthwhile. The real utility here is if you have a Rally of Wings or something that you're hoping to get your opponent with, and then they don't attack or you don't have a chance to use it. Ignite the Beacon is a card draw spell. And what blue players love to do is leave up counterspell, and if they don't cast anything, draw cards. So now white gets a taste of that. Moving on to blue, blue usually has the most instants, and Just looking down my list here, I'm surprised there aren't more, but we're going to cover what we have. Starting with what Blue's probably most well known for, the counterspells. Now, there are several flavors of counterspell, soft counter, hard counter. There are no just unconditional counterspells in War of the Spark. Nothing that just counters whatever you want. But there are several things that do a fairly good impression of counterspells. Let's start with No Escape. 2 and a blue instant, counter target creature or planeswalker spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. And also scry 1. So this is kind of like Dissolve, or kind of like Essence Scatter, but more expensive. It counters a creature or planeswalker spell and puts that spell into your opponent's exile zone. So it gets it right out of the graveyard. So this is a pretty good counter. I think this is probably going to be the best counter of the bunch, and I would definitely play one of these. The fact that you don't have to have blue, and the fact that it hits planeswalkers as well as creatures, means that this is basically Blue's premium removal. The only other counter, the thing that says counter spell in just straight blue, is Crush Descent. 3 and a blue. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. So if they tap out for something, or if they almost tap out for something, you can get anything. Counter target spell. Also, amass 2 means that you get a 2/2 at least at the end of this. So think of this kind of like a Mystic Snake or a Frilled Mystic from the last set. So it's a 2/2 that with flash that when it enters, it counters a spell, unless its controller pays 2. So I think this is probably pretty good, too. I think No Escape is better, but I think Crush Descent could be playable. Now, there is one more straight counter spell. It's in blue and white. So we'll talk about this when we get to the multicolored cards too, but Dophin's Veto. If your opponent is in blue and has the ability to make white mana, or the other way around, Dophin's Veto, this spell can't be countered, which is something I don't like to see on a counter spell. Counter target non-creature spell. So normally non-creature spells aren't really what you care about as much, although this does hit removal spells, and it does hit planeswalkers. So probably this is playable. Just FYI. Now, there are a couple of things here that are not counter spells, but they could operate like counter spells if you use them that way, or they could do other things. Let's talk about Teferi's Time Twist. Say that 5 times fast. It's 1 and a blue for an instant. Exile target permanent you control. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. If it enters the battlefield as a creature, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So this could be used to counter a removal spell by flickering your creature when they try to target it. It could be used when you block in combat and then flicker your creature so that it doesn't die. Also, it makes it bigger. You could actually even use this as a roundabout way of making your creature bigger before blocks and then blocking their creature to kill it. Making your creature bigger, like a combat trick, like the +1/+1, then block. So there are plenty of ways to use this, and I think the utility makes it a good card. There's not a lot of... Oh, I should also mention that you can reuse Enter the Battlefield abilities with things like this. So that's definitely to be noted. Finally, Lazotep Plating is also not really a counter spell, but I would consider it a soft counter to things like removal or anything that targets you or a permanent you control. Lazotep Plating is 1 and a blue, instant. At uncommon, you amass 1, so again, you get to make that 1/1 or put a counter on one of your armies before blocks. You and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. So this just straight makes you invulnerable to anything that might target you or things you control. And also, again, that amass is kind of like making it a creature. So There are plenty of uses for that. I would definitely play one in any blue deck, and I'd probably play 2 or 3. Finally, for commons and uncommons, we have Totally Lost. We talked about Totally Lost yesterday during the removal primer, but Totally Lost is 4 and a blue. Instant speed, put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. Now, this is particularly good when you have things that are good to bounce at instant speed, like maybe an onboard Anthem or something, but it can be used to reset your own Planeswalker if you want to draw that Planeswalker again, although the Teferi's Time Twist would probably be better used for that, because it comes right back down onto the battlefield. Totally Lost is fine, though, if you want to get a double blocker out of the way, or get something with a bunch of counters on it, like, I don't know, an amass creature off the battlefield, because that just doesn't go anywhere. That just doesn't come back. I'd probably play one. I think they'll be good in this format, but if you don't end up with one, you probably won't care that much. Now, there are a pair of rares, a rare pair in blue. We've got Narset's Reversal. Did I say we were out of counter spells? Because I lied. This spell casts for blue. It's an instant at rare, and it copies target instant or sorcery spell, then returns it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this will copy a removal spell and redirect it, or it could copy a counter spell and counter that counter spell. I believe that you get the copy first. No, this is all going to resolve, so you won't be able to counter a counter spell, but you will be able to put it back in your opponent's hand, so effectively counter it and let them draw a card. So this is probably good. You're probably going to get something good with it. It might just win you a game if they're trying to take out one of your big creatures and you get to take out a big blocker instead. And finally, Commence the Endgame for blue is an instant that can't be countered. It's rare, of course. Draw 2 cards, then amass X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So at least 2. So amass 2, possibly amass 7 or 8. If you have 7 cards in your hand when you cast this spell, I don't know how you're winning the game at that point, because you've waited with 7 cards in hand till turn 6. But, it's perfectly serviceable as draw 2, make a 2/2. It might not be great at that. You'd probably want to have a couple of cards in your hand, so draw 2, make a 4/4. I would play this, but it's not exciting at instant. Like, leaving up 6 mana, that's a lot to ask. You're probably just going to burn this as soon as you can cast it, regardless of how many spells you have in hand. Anyway, that is blue for us, and I guess we'll move on to black. We talked about most of these yesterday because mostly they're removal spells, but let's talk about them again. Removal spells can, of course, be used at instant speed to get a 2-for-1 if you go for an enchantment or a combat trick, or they could be used as combat tricks to take out a double blocker. So Sauron's Thirst, Liliana's Triumph, and Ob Nixilis' Cruelty can all be used in that capacity to win an exchange. They can also be used at sorcery speed to just get the last defending blocker out of the way and smash. So removal's removal. We all know about removal. These are an interesting trio, though, because they each do what black does differently. Liliana's Triumph, 1 and a black instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. And then there's a Planeswalker clause. Sacrificing a creature is a good way to deal with indestructible threats. It's a good way to deal with hexproof threats, but they have to be the only thing around, or else you might just get a random token you don't care about. Sauron's Thirst deals 2 damage to target creature, and you gain 2 life. Direct damage is only really done in black in combination with life gain. Otherwise, usually, damage is a red thing. And Ob Nixilis' Cruelty, 1 mana more, 2 and a black, instant. Target creature gets 5, -5 until end of turn, and then if that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So shrinking creatures down. Now this could be used to kill a 6/6 or a 7/7 too, if you needed to block it with something that would then kill it. So there's plenty of versatility there, and I don't know if I said, but Sorin's Thirst is black. It's kind of hard to cast, but if you're mono black, then it wouldn't be any trouble at all. The only other instant in black is Unlikely Aid. 1 and a black. We've got Gideon riding Rakdos into battle. Instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. So that's a way to win combat. That's a combat trick that, yes, I'm going to be bigger than you, and yes, I'm going to survive it. So that's definitely something to watch for. The important mana cost seems to be 2, although Ob Nixilis' Cruelty for 3 mana, you might want to watch out for that too. Likewise with red, we've got a bunch of stuff that we covered yesterday because a lot of it is removal. Chandra's Pyrohelix is 1 and a red, deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. Chandra's Triumph is 1 and a red, deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls with a planeswalker clause on it. Jaya's Greeting also deals 3 damage to target creature only for 1 and a red. And finally, for 1 and a red, we've got Heartfire, which you have to sack a creature or a planeswalker, but it deals 4 damage to any target. Along with that, we've got Sarkhan's Catharsis, which deals 5 damage for 5 mana, 4 and a red, to target player or planeswalker. So that's not creature removal, but it is planeswalker removal, or, again, face removal. So most of these could be used as combat tricks. Obviously, Sarkhan's removal can't be, but it... Sarkhan's Catharsis can't be, but it can be used to hit a planeswalker in the face as soon as it comes down. Your opponent will get 1 activation out of it. But all of these basically 1 and a red instants kill something. So like we've said before, watch out for them being used in combat along with blocks or to finish off something bigger in combat. Along the same lines, at instant speed is Blind Blast for 2 and a red. It deals 1 damage to target creature, and that creature can't block this turn. Also, it reads draw a card. Now, if it's dealing 1 damage to a creature and that creature can't block this turn, they're probably trying to kill you by alpha striking and keeping your biggest thing from being able to block. Otherwise, 1 damage at instant speed might finish off a creature in combat, and of course they get the card back. I don't think this is a very playable card, but it might come up. I'd maybe run it if I was light on playables. I'd be much more worried about the other 5 cards that came before it. However, for true combat tricks, we have 2 of them, both at common. Nahiri's Stoneblades and Samut's Sprint. So, Planeswalker reference cards, I guess we'll say. Samut's Sprint, for a single red, at instant speed, gives target creature +2/+1 and haste until end of turn, and you get to scry 1. So the haste obviously doesn't matter at instant speed, but if you use this as a combat trick, you might be able to win combat and actually save your creature. The +1 toughness can often make the difference there. Nahiri's Stoneblades for 1 and a red, popular mana cost, is an instant, and up to 2 target creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn. So this can be used in a bunch of ways to win a couple of combats or to swing for sudden lethal. And I think even though there is no toughness bump, because it targets 2 things, I think this is going to see play. I would prefer a Samut's Sprint, but I would take a Nahiri's Stoneblades. The last card in red at instant speed is an interesting one. Blue is known as the spell color, but as you can see, red has more instants here than blue has. And it even gets its own counterspell. Bolt Bend. For 3 and a red, at instant, it costs 3 less to cast if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So it could cost a single red if you're in, say, red-green. You get to change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. That's not really a counter spell. Like, it's not going to be able to counter a counter spell, but it can steal a removal spell being played on one of your creatures, or a pump spell being played on one of your opponent's creatures. So anytime, you know what I really want to do with this? I want to draw my opponent's cards. If they cast a card draw spell, I want to draw those cards instead. It's really too bad that most of the draw spells don't read target player draws cards, and usually they just say you these days. However, anything that targets something can be changed. If an opponent tries to make you discard, you could make them discard instead, because that's targeted. So Bolt Bend is, I think, highly playable, especially if you have a bunch of ferocious, that's power 4 or greater creatures in your deck. Now, if red and blue are known for spells, green is really not. We've only got, well, actually, we've got a whole 6 instants in green, and that seems like a good number to me. A very harmonious number, if you like. And green gets to do some things that no other color really gets to do. Band Together for 2 and a green is an instant that lets up to 2 target creatures you control each deal damage equal to their power to another target creature. And I think that means it has to target the same creature. So your 2 2/2s can deal their damage to a 4/4 and kill it. That seems super sweet to me. It's an instant speed fight spell. These tend to be good. At 3 mana, I think the effect is worthwhile. I think you're going to see these a lot. I don't know that it's going to be advantageous to wait for instant speed often, but maybe so. I think in my games, if I really need to kill something, I'm just going to snap it off on my turn. But maybe I'm wrong. We've also got a combat trick returning from, I'm going to say alpha. Giant Growth, the original pump spell, is back. Single green, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn at instant. That's just going to be good. You're going to want one. You're going to play one. You're going to have fun with it. I really want to use it on Mowu. That's the dog that you see in the art there. It's just good. The other combat trick we get in green shows us something else that green hates, which is flyers. Steady Aim for 1 and a green lets you untap target creature. It gets +1/+4 and gains reach until end of turn. Get that flyer out of here. So watch out for this one. Not only do they get to surprise untap something, but at +1/+4, it's probably going to win that combat and still survive. And the reach can snap something right out of the sky. I'm probably going to play the first one of these before my first Giant Growth. In other flyer removal, we've got Forced Landing, 1 and a green. Instant, put target creature with flying on the bottom of its owner's library. Now, I'll definitely main deck this in Sealed and probably sideboard it in Draft. I have been playing Plummets in my main deck of late because there's been a lot of flyers, but there's enough going on in this set that I don't know that we're going to see as many flyers as we have been, so I'm going to start this one in my sideboard. But I do love that it doesn't put the thing in the graveyard. It gets it right on the bottom of the library, so you can't then go and get it back with a graveyard recursion spell or whatever. I think this is great. Of course, no set would be complete without a green enchantment artifact hate spell. Return to Nature for 1 and a green is an instant that you can choose one. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. I think there's enough graveyard recursion that that third mode is probably going to get used more than you'd expect. I don't know that there are many artifacts that I care about. The rare ones in Mythics, sure. Perihelion 2, for one. Destroying target enchantment, yeah, those are all over the place. Even with the amount of Planeswalkers, 36, we still have a fair number of enchantments. And there's nothing like instant speed taking out a pacifism or a prison realm and having a surprise blocker come back to the battlefield. So that's the real reason I think these are instant, to deal with things like pacifism effects and exile effects that are enchantment based. Finally, we've got a rare instant in green, and oh, this one looks big. Awakening of Gauzy is 3 green for an instant at rare. Put 9 +1/+1 counters on target land you control. It becomes a legendary 0/0 elemental creature with haste named Gauzy. It's still a land. So that at instant speed seems just nuts to me. You can suddenly, for 5 mana, have a 9/9 that you didn't have before. End of turn, turn one of your lands into a 9/9. Untap, swing for 9, and kill your opponent. It doesn't give it trample, but it just, there's so much power there for 5 mana. It's almost like a Gigantosaur that's way easier to cast. So it looks like green's got some pretty fun stuff going on. And finally, we finally got there. We have not quite a cycle of guild-colored instants. Starting with Dovin's Veto, we talked about it. This spell can't be countered. Counter target non-creature spell. Seems like mostly a sideboard card to me, but with the amount of planeswalkers running around, who knows. Next, we have D-Spark for white-black. Exile target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. This one seems pretty good. Most of the planeswalkers are 4 or greater, and you can hit them. Big creatures, of course. But just getting to exile something for 2 mana seems pretty powerful. Heartwarming Redemption, 2 red-white for an instant. Discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1. You gain life equal to the number of cards in your hand. Seems like something you might need to build around, or at least hold some land in your hand, because discarding 0 cards, drawing a card, and gaining 1 life for 4 mana doesn't seem great. Holding on to a couple of lands, though, maybe. The fact that this is instant speed makes it playable. If this was sorcery speed, I wouldn't even touch it. Pledge of Unity is 1 green-white for an instant. Put a +1 counter on each creature you control. You gain 1 life for each creature you control. This is the primo combat trick of the set, in my opinion. Pledge of Unity gets just so much value, possibly. You do have to have creatures, and you do have to be in green-white. I wouldn't probably splash this card. You want to be in the green-white proliferate deck already, but if you can proliferate after this, then this just gets you going. Tyrant Scorn is blue-black for an instant. You get to choose one. Destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, or return target creature to its owner's hand. So kill a little thing, or bounce a big thing, or bounce anything. Return target creature, it doesn't say opponent's creature, so you could even use it to replay one of your Enter the Battlefield creatures. I think we're going to see this in Constructed with Lurking Chupacabras, or Ravenous Chupacabras, rather. Fun times. Rouse Outburst is next at 2 blue-red for an instant. Rouse Outburst deals 3 damage to any target. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So card selection, it replaces itself with upside, deals 3 damage to any target. So it's an expensive lightning bolt, but it gets to draw you a card, so I would definitely play this one. It's almost like Hypothesizal for 4 mana, but not quite that powerful. Last card in our review, or our primer, is Death Sprout. 1 black, black, green, the hardest to cast so far. Instant, destroy target creature. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So this is uncommon Assassin's Trophy that gives you the land for 4 mana. I still think this is highly playable. If I were anywhere near green and I was heavily black already, I might splash this in a black deck. I wouldn't splash it the other way because getting double black is not what you want in a, say, green-white deck. But if you're already base black, I would think about trying to splash this card. It seems pretty potent. And that's it. Those are all the instant speed effects. That's all they wrote. I hope you've enjoyed this primer and found it valuable. I wish everyone the best of luck to their pre-releases. I've already been playing some War of the Spark on Arena. You can catch our streams Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern on this channel. You can also check out our other content. If you haven't seen the first 2 parts of this primer, you should definitely check those out. They're fun and interesting. If you want to see what card Tams is most looking forward to from War of the Spark, you can check that link as well. And if you're interested in supporting the channel and helping us continue to do what we do, you could buy us a coffee or a tea in the link below. We have all sorts of other projects. If you want to look at any of the links down below, this is Step signing off and wishing you happy planeswalking.